Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 1, Monday Night Football edition, and we finally, after 5 to 6 months of waiting, have an additional data point to talk about with all 32, or I should say all 30 teams, with 2 still on the horizon tonight with the Jets and Bills doing battle within the division. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I can only begin to imagine that you are thrilled that Week 1 is nearly 98% of the way into the rear view mirror.
Yeah, one of those annoying weeks. I know everyone is very anxious and chomping at the bit for Week 1 to get here, but for us, it's the same games for the last 4 months we've been dissecting. So once that's through, it's good to get to Week 2, have a normal week where it's just 6-7 days of breaking these games down. You mentioned having one data point on these teams. I would venture to say, in the conversations that I've had in the last 12 hours or so, not the best data points. With all of the weather, with a lot of young quarterbacks starting, with a lot of quarterbacks that did not participate in the shrinking preseason. And so it's very possible that there's more overreactions with this Week 1 than we've had in prior years because of all those elements kind of conjoining.
The average age of the NFL starting quarterback Week 1, 27 years old. Now, I know that age comes down quite a bit when you remove Tom Brady from the fold. Drew Brees recently retired, but still the youngest average age that we've seen since the NFL-AFL merger, and that's clearly aided by the rookie quarterbacks that you mentioned getting out there. C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, what have you. Richardson becomes just the third youngest quarterback to start a game at 21 years of age. But as Monday morning tradition has it around these parts, it's all about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Before we get into some of those specifics, the game that we saw last, Payne, I don't even know what to take away from it, from the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys, other than the fact that the Dallas defense saw a weakness along the Giants' offensive line that you highlighted in Thursday's show, and it looked like they were sharks in the water, and there was chum. They came after Daniel Jones in full force right from the opening kickoff.
Yeah, I felt bad for him, and as you kind of have an attachment to one of the teams a little bit, you're kind of just like, hey, when are we going to take this guy out of the game? And I know Dayball was asked about it after the game, and I understand trying to get momentum and build some confidence, but Dallas was swarming last night, and the weather was a downpour. I don't know how much confidence you were going to build by making that a 33-7 game or a 40-7 game late. I would have taken him out a little bit earlier because he was clearly taking a beating, and that was the matchup we outlined on that side of the ball. I just didn't think all of the reports that you had heard that like Evan Neal was just struggling mightily, and they don't really have another option at right tackle, but they were contemplating it. And you have a rookie center. That was one of the things that we kind of outlined. I think Schmidt's going to be fine. But on that stage against America's team, Sunday Night Football, lights came on, and what do you have? A very crucial snap that kind of changed the
game a
trajectory
ton
of that game to start, right?
Yep.
All of a sudden now you're pushed back and you're attempting a long field goal, which means you need to get a little bit lower, and it gets blocked and returned for 7. I mean, that was a massive swing, that missed snap by John Michael Schmidt. So I think there was some issues up front very, very clearly there that the Dallas Cowboys just pounced on. And Mike McCarthy, some creativeness. Obviously, Dak didn't look great when you look at the completion percentage because it was weather aided. But sure, you saw the 40 burger on the board, and Mike McCarthy let everybody know he was calling plays.
Yeah, and then you dig into the box score and go, you picked up how many yards, albeit in a
Yeah.
torrential downpour?
Yeah.
That may not be exactly what you want to put your name on in terms of it being a Mona Lisa. But Dallas off to a hot start. The New York Giants back to the drawing board with a get-right game this weekend against the Cardinals. But, oh, by the way, looking in through the front view mirror, they'll have a short week to prepare for another tenacious defensive line in the San Francisco 49ers. So, Daniel Jones, get your rest, get your time in the ice bath, and make sure you're healed up, ready to go. But in terms of the good that you saw unfold so far through week one, want to give you the opening remarks.
It was bad for us, and we'll always admit when we shit the bed, and certainly the Pittsburgh Steelers were one of those games. But I told one of our loyal listeners, Vero, like anytime that we can take 3 in a game that closes 1 and has a very respected group moving 6 figures, and they come in and bet it 72 hours after us, I feel okay about that. Fortunately, Teaser got home, Ole Miss got home, and the newsletter bet got home. So, I think from our perspective, while it was very ugly for the Steelers bet, we'll take 3 and 1 every week around these parts. But I was very impressed with Brock Purdy, and I think you have to start there. The elbow was hit a couple times by TJ Watt and a couple other defenders. No signs of an issue there. Was pressured on 44% of dropbacks. Somehow Purdy still delivered the 6th best EPA against a very chatty group of Steelers defenders this week. So I was pretty high on what I saw from Brock Purdy. You and I had talked off air. I think we even mentioned it on the NFC West preview. Expected Brandon Ayuk to take that next step as the clear-cut number 1 receiver in this 49ers room, and sure enough, he did. Some contested catches were fantastic. The ability after the catch, route running appears to be better than ever. So having Brandon Ayuk take that next step is huge for Brock Purdy. But as I was watching the game, I was like, I didn't really feel like Brock Purdy was navigating a ton of stuff. The ground game got cooking, obviously, once Cam Hayward went down, and he's the force for the Steelers inside. But when you go back and look at the data, and then I watched the game on replay again this morning just to double down in the misery, I was like, boy, Brock Purdy was navigating the pocket. Not like the fastest dude, but just kind of felt like, and it's weird to say, like Marino in the pocket, able to slide left, take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, wiggle right a little bit. And the way he evaded the pressure was very impressive. So kudos to Brock Purdy.
He's looked a lot more like the quarterback at Iowa State that people had talked about as a fringe first-round draft pick after some of the numbers he put up early in his career. Obviously fell way down the draft boards, and maybe now just starting to scratch the surface given the very quarterback-friendly system that Kyle Shanahan and company runs. But in terms of looking at that game, I mean, you brought up an interesting point to me early on after a drive or two going, well, what's going on with the Steelers as far as their equipment manager is concerned? You're the home team. I know Pitt played Cincinnati on that same track a day before, but you shouldn't be slipping knowing exactly how that particular surface responds to a ton of abuse over the course of a 48-hour period.
That was weird. Yeah, I mean, Ayuk had a great route on the opening touchdown, but the DB slips. And then the very next offensive possession on the interception to Pickett, wide receiver has inside track there and just slips down, and it's an easy pick for Javarius Ward. So I'm not quite sure what was going on there, but there was a multitude of issues, right? I mean, it was ugly for Kenny Pickett in that Steelers offense. All of the things that they were doing in the preseason when there was no pressure on. Hey, we're going to go a little bit faster. We're going to throw the ball downfield a little bit more. We're going to be very aggressive. All of a sudden, the lights came on. The game meant something, and Matt Canada clammed up.
Yeah, the preseason hype train got derailed quickly, and it won't get much easier for the Steelers next week on Monday Night Football when they take on a division rival. And a division rival defensively that put together a masterclass, quite frankly, in the Cleveland Browns. They held the Cincinnati Bengals in check. Bengals just 6 first downs in inclement weather, 142 total yards of offense, held Joe Burrow to 2.6 yards per play. And Kevin Stefanski and company continue their mastery in the showdown of Ohio, that marking the 100th battle. What did you see from the Cleveland Browns defensively that you saw as a potential takeaway? Knowing that offensively, look, there are still some major things to fix for Cleveland, not named Nick Chubb.
No, those would be Watson. Let's see what that looks like. And then obviously Conklin going down with
massive loss.
Pretty serious. Yeah, that's a massive loss for the Browns offense. But Chubb looked good. That was one of those question marks we had, and I'm not really answering your direct question, but just kind of thinking about this game in my head. It appears Chubb is going to get more snap share, a little bit more of that third down role. We were a little bit nervous about what the ground game might look like, with Chubb running in the pistol and, in the shotgun a little bit more, but Chubb had a very nice game there. But specific to your question, the Browns defense upgraded the talent along the defensive line, bottom line. Right, I mean, the guys they brought in there with Delvin Tomlinson and Shelby Harris and going to make a trade to pair a defensive end with Myles Garrett, just, that D-line is a little bit different this year. And then you have Jim Schwartz. And I think he's a much better defensive coordinator, and it's why, we projected defensive improvement in our Browns preview this season. But Joe Burrow... Listen, is he 100% with the calf? Probably not. But he struggled against this Browns defense in perfect weather conditions. I mean, this is now 1-5 against the Elves, as Jamar Chase called them.
And he doubled down on it. He doubled down on calling them the Elves. Somewhere along the way, I get the confidence from these guys. Just shut your mouth. Own your loss. You get another meeting against him. No different than, I guess a little different than Patrick Peterson claiming that he saw tells from Brock Purdy and Brock Purdy calling out Peterson by name in the postgame press conference. But go ahead.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, there was a lot of chatter from that Steelers defense leading up to the game. By the way, I love the mascot for the Browns. I'm a fan of the
incredible 50-yard line logo. Arguably one of the best in the league.
Yes, but I mean, the weather conditions weren't good, but both teams played it. Joe Burrow was not good, right? Completion percentage 15% below expectation, dead last by a long mile in EPA per drop back this week. So we had seen issues with the Bengals offense against the Browns for whatever reason over the years. A different defensive coordinator, didn't matter. But this is a big week here coming up against the Ravens defense, which they've had much better success against, and probably some question marks in that Ravens secondary. So it's good a week to get healthy offensively for Cincinnati coming up here.
In terms of a couple of the other positives that stood out to you in watching a full slate of action, we can go as far back as Thursday if you'd like to give the Lions credit for going into Arrowhead and beating the Chiefs as well.
Well, listen, I think it's a good one, right? I mean, narrative-based, but I think that Thursday night game was far bigger for the Lions than Chiefs.
1,000%.
The Lions, right, it's an extremely emotional team, right? The city of Detroit is all in now. To a lesser extent, it's the NFL version of Dion in Colorado. What's going on there? And all of the offseason chatter from inside that Lions locker room was, everyone knows we're improved. Now it's time to take that next step and compete with the big boys. So to win an Arrowhead against the Super Bowl champs, that's exactly how you start the season in a great mental state. Now, overall, and you can certainly chime in here, the Lions didn't play very well.
You mean 14 points on the road isn't going to win you a lot of games from your offense?
It was a great job defensively. We saw some improvement there from the Chiefs' defense. They completely removed the Chiefs' ground game, and it was clear without weapons, Andy Reid wanted to fire that up early, and the Lions held the Chiefs to 2.6 yards a carry on non-Mahomes runs. And then offensively, hopefully it was an anomaly, and maybe when Jahmyr Gibbs starts to get more snap share, which he should, and Jamison Williams returns, we'll see Detroit's offense have more explosiveness. But 14 points against the Chiefs defense without about $130 million worth of players in Chris Jones and Charles Omenihu wasn't really great. And so I thought we learned more about the Chiefs defense holding top 5 offense to 2 scoring drives, one of which required a fourth down fake punt, the other the 3rd and 12 that was a millisecond away from being a L'Jarius Sneed strip and the game completely changing. But you look at that 3rd and 12 play where L'Jarius Sneed's coming off the edge, almost gets it out, and then there's a miraculous catch on an off-target throw that was worth about 3 expected points. You throw in the Kadarius Toney drop that turned to a pick 6. You're looking at about, just in those 2 plays, about 9 expected points added in a game that ended 1, and it doesn't really factor in the other drops and Charles Omenihu and Travis Kelce and Chris Jones being out. So very good win on the scoreboard, and that's exactly what an emotional team needed. I just came away from that game saying, hey, the Chiefs defense might be improved, which is something we kind of covered on the preview podcast, and something the Chiefs are probably going to need based upon some of those weapons they have on offense.
Well, especially if guys don't want to catch balls. But it's always interesting when you look at the narrative and how different that game is. You alluded to Kadarius Toney's drop that led directly to a Lions pick six, but a couple of other opportunities. You catch a ball or two there, suddenly the dynamic in play changes. The Lions come up a touch short, and we're not talking about those two teams in the same way that we are going forward, but that makes what we do great, and the market obviously reflects some of those tendencies based on a data point or two. When I look at Green Bay, Payne,
the other thing here, Todd, the other thing I don't want to harp on because it was so obvious, and I feel bad for him. You know, Kadarius Toney was obviously massive for the Chiefs winning a Super Bowl last season, and that was all. I mean, I felt bad for the guy because he was just getting shredded Thursday night into Friday. But that, even the last drop, the one where they come out and I believe they run play action and Toney's wide open, that drop was like a 22% swing and win probability. I mean, it was ginormous.
It's one after another for him, and I know Giants fans were getting a good laugh about all that, but karma bit them in the ass last night after a 40-0 loss, and we watched every Giants receiver drop balls. So it's always interesting when you look at how these things play out, and clearly Patrick Mahomes isn't going to throw any of his weapons under the bus, but you could tell his level of frustration when he gets guys open and they're not able to deliver and make plays. Payne, we look at the Green Bay Packers. It's a team that coming into this season, professional bettors were betting over the total. We gave them out over 7.5 and thought that the market had kind of jumped the shark on a team that was overvalued the last couple of years, and Packers fans hated us as much as any fan base in the entire league. Green Bay goes out there, and Jordan Love, for me, the best way I think to describe his performance was efficient, but what we saw from Green Bay that stood out to me was the team was a lot more buttoned up defensively. Now, Luke Getsy deserves a lot of that responsibility. They didn't really throw downfield with Justin Fields, but that Green Bay defense against the Bears team that can be a little bit difficult to prepare for bottled him up a good amount and showed us why it was a unit that we held in such high esteem coming into last season.
You remember our preview podcast, right? And this was a unit that underachieved last year, and there was a clearing of the air in the offseason. And the Packers defensive coordinator comes in and says, hey, has an exit meeting with every player. What do we need to be doing? What do you prefer doing? And every single one of them said, we need to be a little bit more aggressive here in our coverage, a little bit more aggressive in our pressure rates. And we fully anticipated with, 8-9 first-round draft picks on the defensive side of the ball, that once they figured out what they wanted to be defensively, they could be really good. Now, I still think the Bears have tremendous issues up front along the offensive line. I still believe that even if you bring in weapons for Justin Fields, something we outlined, he's going to improve as a passer. But you're looking at a passer that was so horrific last season that even the improvement that he might see this season gets you to where? Still bottom third of the league? I mean, he was so many deviations behind other quarterbacks in value-adjusted average as a passer last year. That improvement might be 25th, 26th, 27th. It's not going to look perfect for Justin Fields. He's very much to this point still a one-read quarterback, and the market told you kind of what was going to unfold here. You know, that was a game that opened 3, closed 1, even with Christian Watson out, but all-around good effort. I mean, Jordan Love missed some throws as well, but you look, finished the week 4th in EPA per dropback, so he had some big plays. It looks like LaFleur has finally figured out that Aaron Jones is the horse, and we got him into some nice routes there as a pass catcher, and we figured out that even though he's a little bit smaller, he's got far more wiggle than A.J. Dillon, so it was good to see him get that goal line carry as well from inside the, right around the 5 or 6 yard line. And so I think you get some of those things figured out, and hopefully they get healthier, right? Christian Watson went down. It looks like the Jaden Reed thing is maybe just a cramp. So hopefully that doesn't turn into anything larger. And then Musgrave looked like a competent tight end as a rookie, someone that they have high hopes for and is going to be an integral part of the Packers offense.
The Bears are a team that I get a lot of fan reaction to. Obviously, having grown up in the area, my friends are diehards, and the level of frustration they displayed and exhibited yesterday, I don't want to quite laugh, but it's always interesting because they believe that the Bears are going to take the next step. And look, they very well could. But again, when you have a young quarterback and you're spending on linebackers because your head coach comes from a defensive background, Let's see if the Bears neglecting to really beef up the offensive line around Fields is something that they're going to ruin, and it should be a fascinating development to watch. We've seen major market movement on their Week 2 game at Tampa, a game that we'll talk about in look-ahead lines as well. But before we go to the bad, wasn't sure if there were other things in the positive manner that stood out to you that you wanted to make sure you were able to highlight for our listeners.
Well, Bears fans are going to hate you for that because they've spent first-round picks back-to-back drafts on the offensive line. They just probably didn't take the right guys.
Well, that and you gave up a ton of draft capital for Chase Claypool, and look how well that experiment's worked out so far.
That's a great transition, and you didn't even know it. I thought one of the better performances of the week came from a wide receiver, Calvin Ridley. And my suspicion is lots of receivers are going to have good days against the Colts secondary. I thought it would be one of the worst secondaries, and we kind of made note of that in our previews. And while I think the Colts front seven is damn good, it continues to show better as a run-stopping unit than a pressure group. And if the Colts front isn't going to get pressure, their secondary is going to be exposed, and receivers are going to light them up, very much like Calvin Ridley did. Ridley appears to be the alpha in the Jaguars receiving group. And if you look, he ran 34 routes.
Whoa,
yeah,
he ran
34 routes yesterday, and T-Law targeted him 11 times on those 34 routes. So very, very good start for Calvin Ridley, and I think that Colts secondary is going to be in for a rude awakening this season.
Well, from good to the bad, and you provided me the perfect segue because we can say all the good things that we want about the Miami Dolphins and what a healthy Tua means to kind of serving as the facilitator. Tyreek Hill put up video game type numbers. But there was another secondary that may have stolen the bacon away from the Indianapolis Colts. That, of course, being the Los Angeles Chargers, who not only did they surrender 8.2 yards per play, they allowed the Dolphins to run 65 plays on offense and gain 30 first downs. They held Tua last year to 10 of 28 passing for less than 150 yards. But Payne, with the bad for the Chargers, we can look at the counting stats. We can look at the advanced metrics. They took what I would define as arguably the single dumbest defensive penalty that I have seen in a long, long time at the end of the first half, basically hauling down a wide receiver 35 yards from the goal line as if it was a Hail Mary and you were defending pay dirt.
I think you said it perfectly. He thought Jackson was. I think he believed the way the ball was thrown. He maybe lost sight of where he was. Very much felt like that was a Hail Mary type of situation where they just allow anything to happen. Right? Guys are just battling down there. They kind of remove the idea of pass interference in those situations. And I think he kind of lost his mind, and that's what he thought he was defending. Certainly the Charger secondary was horrific yesterday. But what was all the talk? The reason that game before kickoff steamed from 51 key number down below was all the chatter of the Miami Dolphins offensive line. It's a problem. It was an area of weakness. Teron Armstead isn't there. One thing that we touched on in our preview podcast, and I know that you need Teron Armstead for this to continue. And certainly when you look at a Week 2 game, Belichick, very masterful, probably is going to find a way to manufacture pressure better than Brandon Staley. But this is going to shocked me when I looked at it. I had to double check that it was right because there's been some issues with some data dumps. But Tua was pressured on 17% of dropbacks yesterday. And if you told anybody of that before the game, they would have told you you're dead wrong with, Mack and Bosa and problems with that O-line. And that was something nobody saw coming, although we did. We saw, I think the offensive line's a little bit improved this year. Let's see if that continues for the next 17 weeks. But that allowed Tua to torch a Charger secondary that we thought would be vulnerable. And most secondaries are going to be vulnerable when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I mean, that play deep down the field, it was a massive play. I believe it was third down. Tua steps up in the pocket and kind of throws it on the run. Somehow Tyreek Hill gets behind a defense that was playing 8 in coverage. I don't know how it happened, but it was unreal to watch. So, Jackson needs to get back to his Patriots form for the Chargers secondary to be better. But Tua is going to finish the week number 1 in EPA per play.
I mean, do something if you're the Chargers different. I don't care if you can't even slow Tyreek Hill down a little bit, but get physical with him at the line and use coverage over the top. I mean, don't let him be the guy that beats you regardless of if it was short yardage, regardless of the big play, but a big win for the Miami Dolphins, avenging a game they lost 23-17 to those very Chargers last year. Seattle Seahawks fans, Payne, already believe that this team could be a legitimate contender in the NFC West. I thought they could take the next step. What I saw on full display against the Los Angeles Rams, especially in that second half, both offensively and defensively, tells me that Pete Carroll has his hands full, and they're going to have to correct things a lot faster than we thought.
This was kind of my fear. Early in the offseason, May-ish, late May, middle of May, whenever it was, we went under 7.5 on the Rams. And my fear was the Cardinals being horrific and Seattle taking a step back. And I think you and I probably were a little higher on Seattle, and then all of a sudden when it came time to really freaking deep dive this team, both of us went into our corners, came back out, and we're like, ooh, not quite sure about this offense. And one first down in the second half for Seattle. Geno Smith wasn't good. 2.7 completed air yards on average, was the 5th lowest of the week. We kind of provided a caution sign in that preview about potential offensive regression and how Geno trended the final 5-6 weeks of last season. And we saw it unfold in front of our eyes against a defense that's literally got one player, and Aaron Donald. I don't think anybody has high expectation for the Rams. Maybe you tweak your projection just a little bit after that data point yesterday, but it's not going to shock anybody if the Rams are still a bottom 5 defense in this league, despite what they did to Geno Smith in the Seattle offense yesterday.
Shout out to BYU great Puka Nacua, who made that Seattle secondary look like BYU was playing against FCS member Utah Tech back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, it was the Tutu and Puka show, which everyone had on their bingo cards this week.
Hey, look, if you'd have told me that Matthew Stafford is going to throw for 330-plus yards in the season opener, I would have laughed. But apparently Kelly Stafford saying he doesn't have connectivity with the young receivers in the locker room, his demise was greatly exaggerated. As far as other bad performances, we obviously gave Brock Purdy the credit he deserves. We mentioned the Steelers. We talked a little bit about the Bengals. Wasn't sure if there was a team or an individual that stood out to you in a negative fashion.
How about a coach?
Yeah, I love roasting coaches after week 1.
What the fuck? And let me not say that. I understand they won by 14, but what on earth was Arthur Smith doing yesterday? Everything we had heard, everything that was provided to us from an informational perspective, that this offense is going to look vastly different. We're going to open this thing up a little bit. We're going to push the ball further down the field. And I understand the offensive line's very good as run blockers, and you went out and got Bijan Robinson, and Tyler Algier was fantastic. You got this nice 1-2 punch. But at some point, you're going to have to give Drake London more than one target. And I just did not see the offensive creativity that we were all guided to believe was going to unfold there. And don't be fooled by that final score. It was 10-10 late in the game, and Bryce Young wasn't very good. And that Carolina Panthers offense is horrific. So interesting to see the lack of creativity from Arthur Smith in that Falcons offense. And my feeling is if that continues, they're not going to be as good as we initially thought they could be.
Yeah, I wonder along those same lines, because I went back and watched that, if it was as much a low-variance game plan, knowing that Carolina wasn't going to be able to do much. I think this week against Green Bay, if they're going to play like they did offensively and call plays that exact same way, the Falcons are going to be in a world of hurt. So I'm curious to see if they get a little bit more aggressive. But yeah, Desmond Ridder, not exactly a deep threat at the quarterback position, and clearly didn't stretch the field at all, albeit in a 24-10 win over a rookie quarterback. Good.
Least shocking news in the world, by the way, that game now taking under money from 41.5 down to 40.
I mean, the totals, they're moving here on a Monday morning. We did see one game actually get bet over the total, which I think it's the only one I've seen thus far begin to go.
Under, just like it was week 1.
And when you look at the ugly category, Payne, I know they got their team to the window. I mean, we had a little bit of exposure to the Tennessee Titans as a field goal plus underdog against the Saints, but that had nothing to do with Ryan Tannehill's performance because he was downright horrific. And just counting stats alone, 16-34, 3 interceptions. He looked tentative all game long. You highlighted the fact he had absolutely no pocket presence. I questioned the decisiveness. Team comes away pretty much useless other than kicking field goals in the red zone. But thankfully, Mike Vrabel had no confidence in Ryan Tannehill either because on 4th and intermediate, they elected to kick a field goal to make a game 16-15. That was 16-12.
Some of us were happy about that. I think we felt very fortunate there about that field goal attempt. The GIF that I told you I was envisioning in my mind, and I'll kind of provide it for listeners. It's like the dog and the fire. He's like sipping the coffee or whatever and saying everything's fine. That was Ryan Tannehill in the pocket yesterday. I don't know what was going on, but he was just hanging out in the pocket. And then listen. He finished the 3rd worst quarterback in EPA per dropback. The Titans offense as a whole had a 32% success rate. Ryan Tannehill's completion percentage is 10% below expectation. The offensive line has some issues, which we thought would be the case, but there was some variance there because there were so many new parts. You said to yourself, hey, maybe they'll surprise. That was not the case. Derrick Henry looks old. Tajay Spears looks like the one guy who's got some burst on that offense. Traylon Burks probably wasn't 100%. And DeAndre Hopkins, if you're expecting certain things out of him, you're just not going to get them. Like, he is very much a bully, physical style receiver. You would think you throw that ball to a guy like that if you're Ryan Tannehill and have some confidence that even if you're not overly accurate, he's going to be able to come down with it. But that was not the case. Very, very poor effort from the Titans offense yesterday. And obviously a hostile environment. Saints defensive line's damn good. Your offensive line isn't very good, right? The basic math there, 1 + 1 = 2. But you got to see more out of the Titans offense, especially this week, right, against the Chargers defense that struggled to get pressure last week against the Dolphins offensive line. They struggled mightily in the secondary. This probably is the better barometer to see if they can muster some offensive efficiency this week.
All right, that's enough negativity for me from a bad and ugly standpoint. I wasn't sure if there was anybody else, player, team performance, or that you wanted to use to put a bow on it before we pivot into look-ahead numbers.
I'm just interested to see. We already kind of got it out of the way about the Steelers, but I'm interested to see what Matt Canada does this week. Are you going to kind of go back to what you displayed in the preseason, or are you just going to go back to what you did last year? And now I think certainly, air quotes, the sharp side this week's going to end up being the Steelers, but it becomes a much more difficult task if Deontay Johnson isn't out there, and that looked like a pretty severe hamstring injury, and then Cam Hayward dealing with a groin. So you could arguably say 2 of your 3 most impactful players probably out for that one.
And one other offensive player that Deepak highlights later in the show may also create a little cause for pause when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and what otherwise would be defined as a tremendous bounce-back opportunity. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. You can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter, absolutely free into your inbox every Friday. Payne talked about it at the top of the show. You had an additional winner there cashing with Jamal Williams' longest rush under 12.5 yards. All you have to do, sign up, comes to you on Friday, reminder for all the content that's on the site, and you'll be able to cash additional tickets right alongside us. Look ahead lines we can kind of breeze through pretty quick, Payne. I wanted to take 3 that stood out to me. We mentioned the Lions' success against the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday night and the Seahawks stubbing their toe and then some in a loss against the Rams, losing outright as a 4.5-point favorite, one of the worst home losses that Pete Carroll's team had suffered since 2017. The Lions were -3 on a look ahead, now out to that 5.5, even a 6 starting to pop.
I'll be candid. I don't think I'm running. I know the idea probably is buying the Seahawks on the low, but it's very possible that you zoom out 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks and you're saying to yourself, wow, Detroit is is a real contender in the NFC. And the Seahawks, I think the verbiage we used in the preview show was, I'm not betting on Geno to do something for the second time in 10 seasons. And if that is the case, that he can't do it, this line might not be as wild as some might think in, 4, 6, 8 weeks from now. And that is unbelievable.
What you're hearing right now is Pete Carroll picking up the rotary dial phone, and he's calling down to the bullpen, telling Drew Lock to loosen up that shoulder. That's what you're hearing right now in Seattle. If this Geno Smith experience that picked up, quite frankly, right where it left off at the end.
I'm very distracted. Keep going.
I understand what you're distracted by. I see the exact same things right now. I just don't want to get your blood pressure boiling. So I want to try and keep you focused on the task at hand before you completely lose all your marbles. Other look-ahead number, we talked about the Bears struggling. We didn't give Tampa credit. They go on the road to a hostile environment, pull off the outright upset against the Minnesota Vikings, one of the stronger sharp positions of the weekend. We saw that game bet from 6 all the way down to 4. I didn't think the Bucs looked overly dynamic offensively. I didn't think they looked great defensively, but they got the win, and you're seeing the betting market respond as that look-ahead number was a pick, now out to a full field goal as Tampa welcomes in Chicago.
Boy, the board is, it was very quiet up until about 15 minutes ago, and now I'm fully distracted. Bears Bucks, as I believe what you just asked me about.
Yeah, pick the -3.
Yes, Tampa was +3 in turnovers yesterday. Certainly provide a very good effort on the road. We saw some buy from professional bettors from 6 down to as low as 3.5 in that game some places on game day. Another wave on game day. I think our thought process was the Buccaneers, at least early on in the season, would be a little bit better than market. And you do have that matchup situation where you have a Todd Bowles defense, which is still pretty good in the front 7, going up against a Bears offensive line that has some issues. Now, at some point, if this is going to leak on the other side of 3, there's probably going to be a little bit of an appetite on the Bears. But it was the least shocking news that the Buccaneers took some early money. And I believe the reopen even last night was about 2.5 once the sharper shops open, right? And then you push out to a 3 because you're just anticipating where the market goes. And so you're just kind of buying the price, and then you'll figure out what to do with it later in the week. And I think that was kind of the approach from some of the guys that I spoke to. Talking
about buying the price and figuring out where the market's going to go, we anticipated there'd be money coming in against this team, given how they looked in their season opener, that, of course, being the Carolina Panthers. The Saints were the bee's knees, the rage this offseason amongst recreational bettors in terms of the pick to win the NFC South. They've gone from a 1.5-point road favorite and look-ahead market out to 3, where we'll see Bryce Young on the national stage for the first time in his NFL career.
Feels very much a play against Carolina than it does on New Orleans. And I know you mentioned the Saints being a buy-on team in the offseason. That's very accurate. But boy, that wasn't the best showing in a home opener yesterday. I will say that. And so there's still some issues there. And it's typically not as good of a team away from that dome. But there's certainly some concerns there for the Carolina Panthers. I just don't see a ton of weaponry. I mean, there isn't a guy that just goes and gets open for that team right now. And it's going to make life for Bryce Young much more difficult than it needs to be. And you even heard Frank talk about it after the game and said, hey, Bryce Young's the least of our concerns right now. And I think there's some issues along that offensive line. Some of the guys, the younger guys that you took pretty early in the last 2 drafts, didn't perform quite to the expectation. And I just don't know if there's a dude that can get open right now. I mean, you're watching Thielen. It's like the king of the 4-yard route. And it's just, I don't see a ton there. So to me, yes, the Saints were a buy-on team this offseason, but professional bettors were dying to fade them in week 1 at home. And so to me, this is, again, very much a play against the Carolina Panthers than it is on. Oh, my God, out to 48.5. Oof. Yeesh. Are you watching this?
I'm watching it right now.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm watching it.
I thought we were going to be able to wait till after the podcast. Now that the line's gone, we might as well just let people know what I've been distracted by for the last couple minutes. I thought the market was very quiet this morning. I mean, nothing going on. And we usually record around 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. And I said to myself, let's just wait on this Dolphins Patriots over 45.5 because we're going to just be able to do this after the show. Market's silent. You can hear a pin drop. Chris, out to 48.5. That's a snafu by me.
It happens. It happens to the best of us. So don't beat yourself up over there. But
all right, let's try to create a decent product here.
When we talk about getting,
I'm only going to be doing it with my blood pressure at about 180 right now.
I know. I'm a little worried about it right now. I don't need you going into cardiac arrest over on the other end of the line, 2,500 miles away. When we talk about getting banged up, obviously it is a big part of the NFL, figuring out what players will and won't be available on any given week, whether it's season-long fantasy or DFS, or most importantly, your sports betting. There's nobody better out there to give you his perspective on who might be out there for week 2 than the good doc Deepak Chona. You can follow him at SportMD Analysis, provides his injury update in the wake of week 1.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right. Thank you, guys. Now let's get to it. We start with Aaron Jones. Now, he had a great game, but as he was running on a longer run, he pulled his hamstring, and you could see him grabbing at it. And the fact that he stayed on the sideline afterwards suggests that this was a milder version. And his comments suggest similarly that this isn't any sort of severe hamstring pull. So we lean towards him playing week 2. He will have a little bit of an elevated re-injury risk, probably around 10-15%. And then we have Deontay Johnson, a little less optimism here. He went down, and the video suggests at least a moderate severity of his hamstring strain. Now, the average on these is 2 weeks, so we would have to lean towards him missing next week, probably returning week 3 to 4. Again, the key with these is the re-injury rate, and we did see that, of course, with Cooper Kupp earlier this year. So Deontay Johnson for the next about 6 weeks is going to have a bit of an elevated re-injury risk. And then next, J.K. Dobbins. Now, as a sports medicine doctor, this is one of the most deflating injuries you can have for an athlete, coming off of a knee injury and then having an Achilles tear. So he's, of course, out for the rest of this year, probably able to return week 1 of next season. But even in dynasty leagues, I wouldn't really even consider him a buy low, because he's going to have probably a 20% or more performance hit for at least the first half of the season. He could certainly be back, and I don't necessarily see him as injury prone. We did see this combination, the ACL and then the Achilles, go out in Klay Thompson, and he looks to be back, but with maybe a little bit of a step lost. I think something similar can occur for J.K. Dobbins. Next, Pat Freiermuth. Now, he took a big shot to the rib and chest area. He returned, which means there was probably no fracture there. But then he had to leave again. And so that really suggests to us that he has a pretty significant either bruise of his bone or cartilage or contusion to the area. And with these types of issues, they usually don't keep athletes from playing the following week. So we would expect Freiermuth to be out there week 2. But you do typically see a 10 to 15% performance hit for about 2 weeks, as these are just very painful and involved in pretty much every motion. Next, Travis Kelce. Now, if you look purely at the data, it projects about a 2/3 chance he plays week 2. The average timeline on bone bruises is 2 weeks, and Travis Kelce will be at 12 days when week 2 rolls around. But recent comments stated that this is a, quote, very deep bone bruise. And that tells me that there is a legit chance that this does extend into week 3. Again, the data would favor slightly Travis Kelce playing week 2. And actually his progression so far, he is planning to try running today. And if it doesn't swell, that's a huge sign that he can get back to some limited practices later this week and be on track to play. So his progression suggests that he has a good chance to play. Data suggests he has a good chance to play. Just those comments are a little bit of a red flag. Next, Mark Andrews. Now, his practice progression, he did participate in 3 limited practice sessions in leading up to week 1. And that probably gave him about a 50-50 shot in our data to play week 1. But obviously he did not. And I think the reason they chose not to play him was because you have a relatively elevated re-injury risk. So realistically, I think he returns week 2. Usually from these quad strains, you see a relatively low production impact, but with, again, 10 to 15% re-injury risk. Next, Cooper Kupp. This is obviously going to be out 4 weeks. The, quote, nerve involvement is likely scarier than it actually is, likely sounds scarier than it actually is. I would project his return at week 5. The data on re-aggravated hamstring strains when the first one is mild, as was Cooper Kupp's, tends to be in that 4 to 6 week range, and that even that would return him around week 4 of the season. But because they're going to probably just do everything to avoid re-injury here, I think that's why they put him on IR. It's relatively reassuring for his re-injury risk, because the faster he comes back, the higher that risk is. So with Cooper Kupp, we're projecting his return week 5, relatively low performance impact when he comes back, but a little bit of an elevated re-injury risk until week 8. Next, Jacoby Myers. Now, by video, he looked to have a high risk for concussion. It was a big helmet-to-helmet hit. He was slow to get up afterwards. Couldn't really say if he had that classic fencing posture that we saw last year with Tua Tagovailoa, but nonetheless, if he is concussed, these take on average just over a week to return, so the odds would slightly favor him being out week 2 and returning week 3. Next, Christian Watson. Now, he was jogging on Friday, and that from a hamstring strain suggests that he's likely to return to practice early this week. So we would lean towards him probably getting in 2 or 3 limited practice sessions and being a game time decision for week 2. Data would slightly favor him playing week 2 at this point, but we will have to really see how the practice progression goes. Next, Jerry Jeudy. Now, he had limited practice sessions in all week, and so that progression pretty strongly suggests that he's likely to be ready to return week 2. Now, with that being said, he probably is going to see a bit of a performance hit. Our data suggests about 10 to 15% for an athlete of Jeudy's profile, and about a 20% re-injury risk for the next 3 weeks. Next, DJ Chark, another hamstring. His progression, he returned to practice on Friday in a limited fashion, and that suggests that he has a good chance, about 65% chance to return week 2. Will again have a moderate re-injury risk, and that's the common theme with any of these muscle strains, but especially the hamstring strains. Next, Zach Moss. Now, he had broken his forearm earlier in the year, got it fixed right at the beginning of training camp. The average timeline on this would return him at week 2. He did have limited practice sessions leading up to week 1, and he likely could have played week 1, but probably also would have had some increased risk of fumbling given the deficit in forearm strength that you see so soon after the fracture. And then Javonte Williams. Now, this is a really uplifting story, and one that I, as a sports doc, will point to for all my young patients who are down on themselves after a knee injury. Just keep your head up and keep working, because Javonte Williams had 13 of his 22 team carries and 4 catches, so he's already getting a solid workload. But if you look at the running back knee surgery data, it does tend to show a ramp up period that lasts 3 to 4 weeks. So our models project increases in his touches over the next 3 weeks, with him reaching a full load by about week 5. And then Michael Thomas. Now another up and down type of situation, but overall a little bit of an uplifting story. We saw him make some good plays, and he had 3 catches, about 40 yards, showing that he is still able to be a productive wide receiver, although not necessarily the all-world performer we saw before. But Michael Thomas being productive is in line with his injury history data. If you look at data on tightrope surgery and high ankles, and you also look at toe surgery and turf toe type of injuries as well, both of those don't show permanent deficits that would be likely to affect Michael Thomas at this point. So it is in line with his data to be productive this year, although given his focal injuries to those specific foot and ankle areas, he is going to be a high injury risk for the rest of the season. Next, his teammate, Kendre Miller. Now, he was questionable for week 1, despite not practicing at all. And that's a pretty atypical thing to see. Usually we see players who are questionable at least log 1 limited practice. We would lean towards him returning week 2, but it's definitely not a guarantee here. We're going to have to monitor the practice reports there. And next, Cam Hayward. Now, the Steelers captain did suggest, based on his comments, that he had a mild severity groin injury. The average on these is 2 weeks, but based on the way they handled it so far, we would lean slightly towards him playing week 2, but again, pending his progress and return to practice. Then the Jags, Brandon Scherff. Now, on the O-line, he had his ankle rolled up on. The video suggested a low ankle mechanism, which is good news. The fact that he came back on the sideline and was stretching and warming up, although he did not return, that pretty strongly tells us he had a negative x-ray. So overall, we're probably looking at a mild to moderate low ankle sprain. For most O-linemen, they're able to tape these up pretty heavily and get back out there the following week. Next, Jaden Reed. Now, he left the game briefly, but he actually just had cramps by report, so no issues expected for week 2. And then a pair of Seahawks O-linemen, starting with Charles Cross. Now, he sprained his toe. Pete Carroll told us it's a negative x-ray. Most wide receivers and running backs would have a difficult time with this because explosive cutting requires that push-off from the big toe. Most O-linemen, on the other hand, are able to put sort of a rigid plate at the bottom of their foot, the bottom of their shoe, and still play. So we would anticipate most likely Charles Cross playing next week. And then Abe Lucas. Now, he has had a knee issue that kept him out of some camp, but it sounds from Pete Carroll's comments that this was basically what flared up on him again. It's relatively unclear what the actual underlying knee issue is, and it's also a little bit unclear how severe it was yesterday. It's just that Pete Carroll said it wasn't a new injury, it was just the same issue. So we suspect that he's probably going to be back next week, but we don't have a lot of information to go off of here, so we're just going to have to watch him coming back to practice. If it did swell up, you can usually pull the swelling, pull some of that fluid off, and maybe inject him and get him ready for the next week. But if not, by probably week 3 is no later than when I'd project him being back. And that's all I got for now, so I will turn it back over.
Always a bit tricky when you get some of the injuries. Payne, obviously Deepak caught a lot of the things that we had highlighted. The Steelers injury that he brought up as well. Pat Freiermuth, another name, as we see some Browns money coming in as well this Monday morning. But one injury that we kind of glossed over, it wasn't that Mark Andrews didn't play for the Baltimore Ravens. It was the fact that the Ravens lost J.K. Dobbins to a torn Achilles. I mean, this is a kid who just can't catch a break.
Feel bad. Obviously, was in some contract disputes, wanted to get paid this offseason. The Ravens were unwilling based upon the knee injury that was severe. And this is why we have Deepak on the show. Talks all the time about re-injury rates. And when one thing goes, it potentially leads to another. And that's what we saw with J.K. Dobbins. So an unfortunate break for him, obviously. And it looked good early on in that game. Looked like he was running confidently. And he was in line for a decent season, and it'll be interesting to see that recovery process and wish him the best, and hopefully we see him on the football field.
On to the final game of week one, a showdown that I think the football diehards and casual fans have been waiting for with bated breath. The team we saw on Hard Knocks, the New York Jets, home underdogs against a divisional rival in the Buffalo Bills. You're looking at the Jets, pretty much painted a 2-point home pup here. This total is down a touch from the peak of the market. 45 painted across the board. There are some rogue 45.5s out there. This will mark the first time since 2011 that the Jets will play a primetime home game in week one. They knocked off the Cowboys way back when, 27-24. When we look at this Bills team, some interesting trends to keep in mind. Obviously, past history, not an indicator of future success, but the Bills were one of the best under teams in the league last year. They went 7-1 under the total. It was the best record of any team in the league, if you're into those things. The Bills, 20-10-2 against the spread on the road since 2019. It's the second best mark in the NFL during that span. You look at Josh Allen, a robust 10-2 straight up, 8-4 ATS record the last 12 times he's participated in primetime. And the Jets, no strangers to futility, just 1-14 straight up the last 15 games played in September. But Payne, Rex Ryan came out and said this was the most talented Jets roster in the history of the franchise. When you're looking at the handicap and a matchup or two that you're highlighting for tonight's game, we know about Aaron Rodgers, we know about some of his struggles week one, but let's see how the man can do in Gotham matched up against this Bills defense.
That's probably the best place to start, and I think everyone's going to be focused on Aaron Rodgers, obviously, for good reason, but I think the matchups up front, because there's a ton of variance there. The good news is Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton come into this game relatively healthy. Vera Tucker is ready to go, and the Jets are starting the game tonight with the projected 5 they wanted. Now, if you look last season, the Jets' offensive line finished roughly bottom third of the league in pass block win rate and pressure rate allowed. But that group was severely injured. And when you look at adjusted games lost, the Jets had the 4th most injured offensive line since 2000. So you have to throw some of your priors away, have to project improved O-line at least early on before some of those guys get injured again. But I think that level of projection as a handicapper requires some art, so to speak. And then for the Bills, we know Von Miller's out at least 4 games. Can Greg Rousseau take his game to another level? Can Leonard Floyd help fill the void? What we know for sure is Von Miller changed the Bills' defense last season. It was remarkable when you look at some of the on-off-field splits. And when Von Miller was on the field, the Bills were 3rd best in pressure rate. Over a 37% pressure rate, nearly an 8% sack rate. Without Von Miller, the Bills were 6th worst in pressure rate. Bottom third of the league in sack rate. So that's going to be really the key focal point there. That battle, though, has some variance to it. So it's interesting to kind of see how that maps out. We're also going to learn a lot about what the Bills do defensively. Sean McDermott, that was all the news this offseason about him taking over the defensive play calling. And the claims are that Sean McDermott wants more diversity in his coverages. He wants a little bit more aggression. He wants to be able to tailor game plans specifically to opponent. Sounds great. It's all fantastic stuff. We'll see if it actually unfolds here. Offensively for the Jets, some variance in what they want to do. Are they going to be operating out of more 3 wide receiver sets with Aaron Rodgers? You would think so. And what does that mean for the running back situation? Breece Hall certainly functioned better against light boxes because of the 3 wide receiver sets the Jets used last season. 65% success rate, 26% explosive run rate for Breece Hall against these light boxes. Delvin Cook comes over from Minnesota in Kevin O'Connell's offense, which was mostly 3 wide sets. So that's what I would kind of expect here. Even though the Jets have 2 decent tight ends, allows them to be multiple. And then the other factors like Tre'Davious White. Does he return to the pre-knee injury form? Because you know where Aaron Rodgers wants to go with the ball first, and that's to Garrett Wilson. There was a portion of Hard Knocks, which you mentioned, which, we kind of, I think, watch Hard Knocks for entertainment, but you can kind of pull a piece or two of information out of there that actually is applicable, right? And there was a portion there where effectively Aaron Rodgers is telling Garrett Wilson to keep working because he's going to hold on to the ball an extra half tick in the pocket just to see if he eventually opens up. And we saw that in the preseason. I believe they played a handful of snaps together, and there was 3 targets just immediately in his direction. And that's going to be an interesting thing to watch unfold with how the Bills elect to defend that, because Buffalo last season struggled against number one options. Maybe it's because White wasn't himself, but Buffalo is 8th worst defending wide receiver one. So I'm interested to see how Sean McDermott elects to play his coverage tonight. Again, if he's more diverse, that's awesome. But if you come into this game, right, thinking you can play zone, because that's what the Jets offense was very poor doing last season, I don't know if that's the thing, right? Like Rodgers isn't Zach Wilson, right? I mean, you look last year against zone coverage, Wilson had an inaccurate throw rate 10% higher than Aaron Rodgers in a down season. So I'm really intrigued to see what Buffalo does there defensively. And this side of the ball, candidly, is why there's a difference of opinion in this game. And I know it's one we've kind of talked about because it's been up for 4 months, whether it was the May show, whether it was, the Jets preview, whether it was the Buffalo preview. Like at +3, professional Jets money. At pick, professional Bills money. And that's why we're sitting here game day in the morning. It's settled at 2, and it's a pretty liquid market at this point. It's a pretty shaped market, having been bettable for 4 months, and I think a lot of it has to do with the variance on this side of the ball.
Good old no man's land right now, and odds makers obviously have the luxury of being able to move this number wherever they so choose, down to pick, back up to that 2.5 range. Don't think we are getting to 3 unless something drastically changes there. On the other side of the ball, this obviously a matchup with a lot more familiarity, Payne. The Bills didn't exactly go out and light the world on fire in 2 meetings against their divisional rivals last year. We know what Josh Allen is capable of doing. I mean, he led the NFL last season in passing touchdowns when under pressure at 13. Since 2020, Allen has 38 passing touchdowns when he's under duress, 9 more than the next highest player, Patrick Mahomes, but he was plagued by turnovers, 19 turnovers last year, the most of any player in the league. The playmakers, James Cook and the brothers Cook, we'll see how he fares as the true number 1 there. Stephon Diggs matched up with Sauce Gardner most likely, depending on how the Jets elect to work their coverage scheme. And I think the Bills' biggest question coming into this year, trying to figure out exactly who their true number 2 option will be in the offense. Will it be Gabe Davis taking the next step? Will it be rookie Dalton Kincaid? But week 1, obviously very different than what we could see down the stretch. But the Jets' defense, every bit as good as advertised, even if you may believe there's a little bit of regression in store just because that's the way things work.
Very good defense last year, and the Jets gave Josh Allen and Ken Dorsey some fits. If you just look at like EPA and success rates for the Bills, they were all substantially below schedule adjusted season averages, but there was some noise in there, but you just look at the numbers across the board. Josh Allen specifically saw his completion percentage dip 9% against the Jets. The yards per pass attempt a full 2 yards lower. Overall rating 36 points lower. But there's some reasons for that, right? You obviously get Ken Dorsey in his first full season as an offensive coordinator. Weather wasn't ideal in one of the matchups. Josh Allen's elbow at that point in the season was impacted as well. And so just a couple things contributed to the underwhelming offensive outputs there for the Bills. But when I look at this matchup on paper, this season it feels like Buffalo might have a few more options that make this interesting. You mentioned Dalton Kincaid. I think he's the first guy you have to think about. The Buffalo source I have says that he's the real deal. And I know we usually shy away from rookie tight ends because it's a very tough transition, being asked to do so many things as a receiver, as a pass protector, as a pass blocker. My understanding is that's not the case for Dalton Kincaid because they're not asking him to do those things. They're lining him up as a slot receiver. That's virtually what I am hearing. And that's where you want to attack the Jets, inside. And the reason's twofold, right? The Jets' outside corners with Sauce Gardner and Reed are pretty elite. That's a great tandem. And the Jets' linebackers in coverage leave a lot to be desired. That was kind of the one problem area we identified in the preseason previews. So you look, the Jets were bottom 6 in both receptions allowed and yards to tight ends if you're into counting stats. But also, the Jets allowed the second most targets by percentage to tight ends, the most receptions by percentage to tight ends at nearly 27%, nearly 8 yards per target allowed to the tight end position. So Kincaid and Knox have to show well tonight, take advantage of some of the interior of that Jets defense. It's a little bit vulnerable. James Cook as well has a unique skill set that he's able to attack the Jets in that area of weakness, right? Have the tight ends clear out and Cook come in underneath. James Cook is going to have an increased snap share. That's very obvious, right? He led the league in targets beyond the line of scrimmage for all running backs, over 6 yards a touch. He's pretty damn dynamic. And then the one thing in a game like this that the Bills do have the advantage of is Josh Allen's legs. right? When you see a total dip from 47 to 45, and as we record, it appears, some rain is in play, just like last night with the Cowboys and Giants. Even if like the heaviest rain is in that 4 to 8 p.m. pregame block, it kind of paints a picture with this total coming down that the matchup is going to have some grinded out possessions to it, right? And so Josh Allen's legs could be the difference here. 3 rushing touchdowns against the Jets last season, 4 runs of 10+ yards. The Jets don't have the cheat code on the other side where you can draw up designed runs like the Bills. So I think those are some of the areas here, Todd, is Josh Allen's legs providing a little bit of an edge, and then implementing that new weapon in Dalton Kincaid in the slot and having him operate over the middle, which to me are the 2 areas where the Jets might be a little bit vulnerable defensively, and that might just provide that little edge. But again, clear battle on this game. And I think, as you look at it now with, the game sitting 2.5, are you running to the window without a 3? Probably not. Could you use it as, an open leg teaser or maybe if that's the way you elect to want to back the Jets? For me right now, there's not a lot on this game, and again, we've had 4 months to bet this thing. If you wanted the Bills, you could have laid pick. If you wanted the Jets, could have taken 3. So, kind of a weird game here, even though it's so high profile.
Game that'll be fun to watch. Don't always make for the best betting opportunities, but all eyes for NFL fans will be glued to the showdown tonight at MetLife Stadium. And again, watch that weather forecast as Payne mentioned, although the heavy stuff should be out of the area before game kicks off a little after 8 o'clock Eastern time. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Payne, anything else you'd like to share with our loyal listeners before we take a 48-hour break and come back refreshed and energized and ready to attack the college gridiron on Wednesday with Brad Powers?
No, we ran long for a Monday show. The goal is keep these under an hour, and I don't think we accomplished that. So let's get out of here.
All right, we are officially getting out of here. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners, with whatever wagers you choose to make on the first Monday Night Football game of the season, and hopefully we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.